Support for the Alan L. Edwards Psychology Lecture Series is provided by the University of Washington Alumni Association.
The Science of Psychology in the Real World. Made possible through an endowment from noted University of Washington professor Alan Edwards, whose half-century of research, teaching, and writing transformed psychological research. Tonight, part 2 of Human Memory and the Law, featuring University of California at Irvine professor Elizabeth Loftus.
It's my pleasure to introduce our distinguished speaker who's next. Dr. Elizabeth Loftus is visiting us as a distinguished professor from the University of California at Irvine. She holds faculty positions in 3 departments: psychology and social behavior, criminology, law and society, and cognitive science, as well as a position in the School of Law. She received her PhD in psychology from Stanford University in 1970, and she rose to the ranks of assistant to full professor of psychology here at the University of Washington. And then she moved to UCI in 2002. Since then, she has been publishing profusely lots of books, 22 books, including the award-winning Eyewitness Testimony, as well as over 500 scientific articles with support from NIMH, National Institute of Mental Health, National Science Foundation, and a number of foundations as well. Dr. Loftus's research of the past 30 years has focused on the malleability of human memory, and that's what she'll talk about tonight. She's been recognized for her outstanding research with 6 honorary doctorates and election to the Royal Society of Edinburgh, the American Philosophical Society, and the National Academy of Sciences. She is past president of the Association for Psychological Science, the Western Psychological Association, and the American Psychology Law Society. Dr. Loftus has contributed her expertise to hundreds of cases, including well-known ones such as the McMartin preschool molestation case, the Hillside Strangler, the Abscam cases, the trials of Oliver North, and the trial of officers accused in the Rodney King beating, the Mendez brothers, and so on. Many well-known cases. She's also been involved in litigation against well-known figures such as Michael Jackson, Martha Stewart, Scooter Libby, and the Duke University lacrosse players. With that vast experience, I can't wait to hear our next speaker, Dr. Beth Loftus.
Thank you. Well, it's a pleasure to be back in Seattle, and although my husband is going to be a tough act to follow, but I'm going to give it a try. As a scientist who is interested in memory and memory distortion, you know, I go through life collecting memory stories everywhere I go, and a few just fell into my lap recently, like the memory of Mitt Romney, who, when he was running for the Republican nomination for the presidency, he talked about this very important event in his life. It was his memory of the Golden Jubilee. Now, the Golden Jubilee was the 50th anniversary of the automotive industry in the United States. And Romney's memory was very richly detailed. He said he was about 4 years old. His dad, who was a politician before him, was the Grand Master for this big ceremony that occurred in Detroit. They'd painted the streets of Woodward Avenue, where the parade would mainly travel. They painted the streets in gold. There was just one problem with Mitt's memory. The event occurred on June 1st, 1946, 9 months before he was born. And so we could say that he could have been conceived at the time, but it is inconceivable that he was actually there. Just to show you that my memory distortion stories and collection, it happens to be bipartisan. I want to tell you about Hillary Clinton's memory when she was running for the Democratic nomination for the presidency back in 2008. She talked about this very, very harrowing trip that she had taken to Bosnia. She said, "I remember landing under sniper fire. There was supposed to be some kind of greeting ceremony at the airport, but instead we just ran with our heads down to get into our vehicles to get to our base. Now, I'm not sure what Hillary was thinking, but she did go to Bosnia, but she did not go by herself. She went with other people, and some of those other people were taking photographs. And so here is a photograph of that landing in Bosnia. You can see it occurred in 1996. She's there being greeted by children. It's a very friendly greeting ceremony. She's there with her daughter Chelsea, in those days when Chelsea had curly hair. And what is going on here? Well, the pundits had a field day. One of them gave her 4 Pinocchios. 4 Pinocchios, because there was no corkscrew landing, no sniper fire, there was no canceled airport reception, and she was not the First Lady to go into a war zone. We haven't heard from Mitt Romney, but we did hear from Hillary. She did come up with an explanation, and when she did, she said this. She said, I made a mistake. I had a different memory. I made a mistake. That happens. That proves I'm human, which for some people is a revelation, she said. And you know, what I love about these examples is all that education, all that experience, all that training, all that Yale Law School degree in the case of Hillary, or that Harvard degree in the case of Mitt Romney, doesn't protect you from having false memories. So in most of the work that I've done over the past number of decades, I've tended not to focus on those experiences of politicians where they can have memory mistakes and maybe be embarrassing, but memory as it applies in legal cases. And the kind of legal case, one kind of legal case that I've been most interested in, one that Jeff alluded to during his lecture, are cases involving actual crimes that occurred, actual people who were convicted, but ultimately DNA testing proved that these people were innocent. They may have spent 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years in prison, but DNA now has proven that they didn't do these crimes. There's a relatively new book called Convicting the Innocent by a law professor, Brandon Garrett, that analyzes the first, I think, 250 or so cases from the website of the Innocence Project. And I'm just going to show you some data from the first 225. There are a lot of reasons why people get convicted of crimes they didn't do, but the major reason, shown in the red bar here, is faulty human memory, responsible in more than 3/4 of these tragic cases. I've also paid a lot of attention to a different kind of case that rose in prominence in the early 90s, and these are cases you might describe as being repressed memory accusations. One of the most famous is a case involving a father named Gary Ramona and his daughter Holly. Gary was an executive with the Mondavi Winery in Napa, California. He was making $400,000 a year. He had a wonderful job, a terrific family, lived in a beautiful house. His world came crashing down when his daughter Holly went into therapy. And there, after certain therapeutic procedures, including sodium amytal injections, his daughter began to be convinced that her father had raped her between the ages of 5 and 16, forced her into rapes, forced her into sex with the family dog, all allegedly buried into her unconscious until the therapy made her aware of these experiences. And I can say, after years of reading and thinking and studying this notion of massive repression, there is no credible scientific support for the idea that memory routinely works this way. And yet we began to see these kinds of claims being litigated throughout this country and even some other parts of the world. And as I would work on some of these cases and think about some of these bizarre memories that were being introduced into court cases against other people, I decided to rewrite that solemn oath that witnesses take when they get on the stand. I really think this is a much more apt oath, and that we should be asking people to swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, or whatever it is you think you remember. And you know, much as I've been trying to advocate for this new oath, it hasn't caught on yet, but I don't give up. And so over the course of my scientific career, I and my students and other collaborators have developed a number of paradigms for studying memory that I think map on nicely to these two types of cases. So the first paradigm is sometimes called the misinformation paradigm. And here, what you have is people coming into a laboratory, they see an event, they get some post-event information about that event, and then they're tested to see what it is they remember. And that's kind of like that first category of cases where there really was a crime, and there really was some kind of post-event information that may have contaminated the recollection. But to map onto that other kind of case, where we actually believe that nothing happened to begin with, but people developed these very rich false memories, we now have something called the rich false memory paradigm. And we study this by starting not with an event. There's no event to begin with, but we just ply people with suggestions about their past, and then we eventually test them to see what they remember about their childhood or about their more recent past. And so just to give you a sense of the richness of the materials that might be used in some of the first type of study, the misinformation study, we might show people an event, and I just took a few snapshots from this event. So our subjects might see a woman walking down the street, a lot of things happen to her. Notably, in the middle of this scenario, a man bumps into her, she drops her possessions. He looks like he's trying to help her, but while he's at it, he reaches into her bag, pulls out her wallet, and puts it into his jacket pocket. Now, more things happen to this woman. Eventually, she notices her wallet is missing. She starts to look for it and then talk to other people. Did you see anyone come near me? And so on. Afterwards, our subjects in these studies might be exposed to some post-event information. So they may hear another witness talk about what he or she saw in that unfolding crime scenario. And that other witness might ramble on about what was seen, and sprinkled into the other witness's recollection are bits and pieces of misinformation. And so here we see that post-event witness talking about when the guy reached into her bag, pulled out the wallet, he put it in his pants pocket. And so there's an example of misinformation comes after the crime scenario is over. The other witness talks about some other details. And now we're back to our original witness who actually saw the guy put the wallet in the jacket, but the post-event information suggests it was the pants pocket. And we ask our witness, what do you actually remember seeing yourself? Where did he put that wallet? And so work with these newer materials follows work that I did here at the University of Washington back in the 70s, where we showed people an accident, a simulated accident, and this is actually a scene that was right near Guthrie Hall, where a car comes to an intersection and then has an accident. There's originally a stop sign, but with a single leading question, we can get people to believe and remember they saw a yield sign at the intersection, not a stop sign. So this is an example of what's now called, in the scientific literature, the misinformation effect. You expose people to misinformation about something they themselves have experienced, and it can supplement, contaminate, alter, or distort their recollection. Now, you might think that, well, you know, these materials are pretty artificial. I wonder if you had a real live upsetting situation, like a real live crime witness or crime victim or accident witness might be experiencing, would you see results that are different? Maybe the memories would be stronger. And I recently published a paper just about a few weeks ago in which we had a chance to look at people in a real-world situation undergoing, well, how can I put this, an extremely aggressive and hostile interaction. The subjects in this study are what make the study unusual. And I have access to these subjects because of a psychiatrist named Andy Morgan, who has been since 2004 studying our military personnel who are undergoing a training exercise that prepares them for what it's going to be like if they are ever captured as prisoners of war. The school is called Sere, and many of our military personnel undergo this experience. They learn how to evade the enemy. They learn how to escape if they're hunted down. They learn how to resist if they're captured or imprisoned or tortured. They eventually are captured. They're put into a mock prisoner of war camp that looks something like this. They're hooded. They're stripped of their identities. They're strapped together. They're thrown into these little cells with these third world toilets and no toilet paper. This is one of my worst nightmares. And ultimately, they are rescued by helicopter, which is what's going to happen to them if they are being held in a jungle area where it's too dense for a helicopter to land. And eventually, when they're done with this exercise, they are rescued, and there's an unbelievable flood of emotion. So Morgan has, in some of his prior work with these military personnel, measured cortisol levels, the stress hormone levels associated with undergoing this Sere experience. And you can see by looking at the red bar, they are higher than other experiences that are known to be stressful for people, such as skydiving for the first time, shown in the green bar. Well, I had a chance to talk Morgan into introducing misinformation into the environment of these military personnel. And this is the study that we've just recently published. So to tell you a little bit more about what happens, these soldiers first go through some classroom instruction, then they're out in the field, they're trying to evade being captured. They spend 4 days out there in the wilderness trying to evade the capture, but they can't. They are captured. They undergo a 30-minute interrogation in that mock prisoner of war camp. It's very aggressive. It's very hostile. In some cases, it's even involved some things like making people bleed and subjecting them to waterboarding. And later on, they're going to have to try to identify the person who conducted that hostile, aggressive interrogation. The twist here, and this is just a piece of the study, so that I'm just giving a little piece of it, is some of these soldiers are exposed to misinformation. And the misinformation is introduced into their environment like this. Look at this photograph of your interrogator. Did he give you a blanket? Did he give you anything to eat? Did he let you speak to any other people? The trick is that this is a photograph of a completely different person. Later on, these soldiers are going to have to try to identify the person who conducted that hostile, more than unpleasant interrogation. And the actual perpetrator conducting the interrogation might not even remotely resemble the foil in the misinformation photo. In this particular study, we tested people by giving them a 9-person photo spread. I've obscured some of the faces of the fillers because of security reasons. But you will see that the real guy isn't there, but the misinformation foil is in the number 2 position. And what do these trained soldiers do when asked to try to identify the face of the person who conducted that interrogation? If they haven't been exposed to any misinformation, 53% of them went ahead and picked someone. They were all wrong because the real guy wasn't there. Rarely did they pick that misinformation foil, just some percentage of the time, but not favoring it more often than other foils. How about the soldiers who were exposed to that misinformation foil and the interrogation? Now, 91% of these soldiers went ahead and picked someone. Of course, they were all wrong, and invariably, they are picking the face in the misinformation photo. And so what this study is showing is that these highly trained soldiers undergoing a very stressful kind of real-world experience do make false identifications. They'll do so with high confidence. Misinformation leads to more of them, more likely that these soldiers are likely to pick that key foil. And you know, we spent some time thinking about, should we publish these findings? Are we putting out there a recipe to teach the bad guys how to be hostile, aggressive, and mean to people, and then wipe away the memory for the experience? And ultimately, we came down on the side that it's better to get the knowledge out so people can figure out how to defend against it later. So this is just an example of a recent study on a misinformation effect. Here, misinformation introduced by an erroneous photograph. And out there in the real world, we pick up misinformation when we are interrogated in a suggestive manner, when we talk to other people in conversation about some event we have seen, when we are exposed to media coverage about some event that we might have experienced. All of these provide an opportunity for all of us to be exposed to new information that can contaminate or distort our memories. But I want to now move to this kind of more difficult situation, the kind of paradigm that was intended to help us study what we think might have gone on in that Ramona case, where many of us believe that nothing happened in the first place, but somehow through highly suggestive therapy, this daughter was led to believe and remember that she had a decade's worth of horrific traumatization, all supposedly buried into her unconscious. And if these memories aren't real, where could they have come from? And when I first began to get involved in these kinds of repressed memory cases, there really was kind of a challenge. I mean, can't you show us you can do a little more than turn a stop sign into a yield sign? Show us you can plant a really rich false memory for something that didn't happen if you want to be applying this kind of science to the sort of situations that you want to be applying them to. And that was a bit of a challenge because we have research ethics committees that are really not going to be very favorably disposed to allowing us to go out and try to convince our experimental subjects that daddy raped them for 10 years and forced them into sex with the family dog. I mean, you need to find an analog. And so at some point, in conjunction with my former graduate student, Jackie Pickrell, who's here in the audience, we decided to plant the false memory when you were 5 or 6 years old, you were lost in a shopping mall. You were frightened, you were crying, you were ultimately rescued by an elderly person and reunited with the family. And by the time we were done with a few suggestive interviews, we had succeeded with about a quarter of these ordinary, healthy adults in getting them to believe or remember all or part of this made-up experience. Well, we got criticized right away. I mean, getting lost is so common. Can't you show us you can plant a false memory for something that would have been a little bit more bizarre or upsetting? And other investigators came along to provide the kind of evidence that, yes, you can. And so one group planted the false memory that when you were a kid, you had an accident at a family wedding and you spilled punch all over the parents of the bride, succeeding in doing this with about a quarter of their sample of adults. And another group in Canada succeeded in planting a false memory that you were a victim of a serious indoor accident or a serious vicious animal attack. They were getting really good at it because they succeeded in planting a complete false memory in the minds of 26% of their subjects and a partial false memory in an additional 30%. And from the University of Tennessee, a research group planting a false memory that when you were a kid, you nearly drowned and had to be rescued by a lifeguard, succeeding with about a third of their subjects. So these are some examples, experimental examples, where people have been led to believe and remember and to develop these very rich false memories, things that were completely made up with the help of the subject's family members and a few suggestive interviews. But you don't need that form of strong suggestion. There were other techniques that were going on in some therapy circles that were leading people to false memories, and we began to study them in our laboratories. And so getting people to imagine that they had certain experiences, even if they couldn't remember them, that guided imagination can lead people to false memories. Sexualized dream interpretation was frequently being used in some cases, and we showed that you could use dream interpretation to get people to remember things that didn't happen that we had completely made up. Hypnosis, especially with highly hypnotizable people, could lead people to develop false memories, exposing people to other people's memories, plying them with false information, and I'll show you some examples of that in a minute, and some kind of high-tech manipulations with doctored photographs. By the way, in that doctored photograph area, there are a few studies out there where you can show people doctored photographs of their past, and they'll start to believe that they had these experiences. Slate.com did a wonderful article called The Memory Doctor, maybe about a year and a half or 2 years ago. And in anticipation of publishing The Memory Doctor, they decided to do a study with their online readers. And so they showed their online readers some photographs of some political public events and asked whether the readers remembered seeing these events and to describe the circumstances in which they may have seen the photograph or thought about it. And so here's a photograph of our president shaking the hand of the president of Iran. Remember seeing that? And many people said, oh, yeah, I did. Or how about, do you remember seeing the photograph of Roger Clemens visiting President Bush on the ranch during Hurricane Katrina? Oh, yeah, I remember that. Well, it turns out they couldn't have remembered that because these photographs were created with Photoshop. So Roger Clemens was never visiting Bush on the ranch. Somebody else was. But Clemens' photograph was Photoshopped into the scene. And our president didn't shake the hand of the president of Iran. Somebody else did. But the Iranian president was Photoshopped into the scene. And yet, there were a few other fake photos, but you can see here that many people absolutely remembered seeing that photo in the past after the suggestive presentation that it was real. With the Bush-Clemens vacation, it was about 15% of the sample, and this is a study with 5,000 subjects. And with the Obama handshake, over 25%. We recently got our hands on the Slate data, and with my graduate student, Stephen Frenda, just last month published an analysis of how political orientation affects the kind of false memory you develop. So it turns out the conservatives were much more likely to fall for the Obama handshake. The liberals were more likely to fall for the Bush-Clemens vacation fake photo. People don't just say, oh, yeah, I saw it. There are boxes where they can comment on their memories for what they saw. And so one Obama handshake subject said, oh, read it on the internet at work. I remember it perfectly. And another, I do remember Fox freaking out about this. They said it made America look weak. And on that Bush-Clemens vacation, big Astros fan, live in Texas, very much remember this. And another one, I really hated the fact that while Bush is entertaining a baseball legend, the Astrodome is being used as a makeshift hotel. Well, you know, of course, this, you know, with the doctored photographs, we know that these are absolutely false, and they've been created with Photoshop. With some of the other false memory studies, the critics came along and they'd say, you know, like vicious animal attack or lost in the mall, you know, maybe it really happened. Maybe your suggestive interviewing pulled out a true memory rather than planted a false one. That was the next criticism that we heard. And so that led us to say, well, we're going to just have to plant some false memories of things that would be implausible or even impossible. And this is the genesis of the idea of some of my graduate students, headed by Sere Berkowitz. We planted a false memory that when you were a kid, you went on a trip to Disney, and there you had your ear disturbingly, persistently licked by the Pluto character. Succeeding with a significant minority of subjects in getting people to believe and remember this. And guess what? They don't want to pay as much for a Pluto souvenir. So we think we're, you know, venturing into economics here. You know, people criticize this study. They said, how do you know it didn't happen? Pedophiles like to go and work in places where there are a lot of kids. Maybe there was like a pedophile type person who put on the Pluto outfit and was licking kids' ears. And so we really had to, you know, go that next step. Let's plant something that would be impossible. And that was the genesis for the idea. Let's try to get people to believe and remember. On a childhood trip to Disney, they met and shook hands with Bugs Bunny. Now, this is impossible because Bugs is a Warner Brothers character and wouldn't be at a Disney resort. Or when the Los Angeles Times editorialist wrote about this study after I presented it at a scientific meeting, he said the Wascally Wabbit would be arrested on sight if he tried to go to Disney. And yet, after viewing this fake ad for Disney, where you see the castle and it's all about the magic of Disney and there's Bugs, you can't read the text, but it's about the, you know, the highlight of your trip was meeting Bugs Bunny. He shook your hand. We had lots of people telling us they remembered later on, when we asked them which characters do you remember meeting, that they remembered meeting Bugs. And they'll give you all kinds of details of that meeting. I shook his hand, I touched his ear, I touched his tail. I heard him say, "What's up, Doc?" I saw he was eating a carrot. So you can get very richly detailed false memories through these kinds of suggestive techniques. Well, since leaving UW and moving to the University of California, Irvine, I and my postdocs and graduate student collaborators have been asking this question about these false memories. If I plant a false memory in your mind, does it have repercussions for people? Does it have consequences? Does it affect people's later thoughts or intentions or behaviors? And the way we decided to study this is by trying to plant a false memory that when you were a kid, you got sick eating particular foods. You got sick, for some subjects, you got sick eating dill pickles. For others, you got sick eating hard-boiled eggs. We planted these false memories by using a variation of the false feedback technique. I'll just give you a little bit of detail about that. Our subjects come in. We gather a whole bunch of data from them, data about your personality, your thoughts about food, all kinds of data, just so that what follows can appear to be more credible. They come back a week later, and we tell them that our really smart computer program received all of their data from the week before and determined that certain things probably happened to them when they were a child. And so Johnny Jones gets a personalized profile. He thinks it's just for him. He doesn't realize that other people are getting an identical one. And he learns that the really smart computer determined that when he was a kid, he felt sick after eating a hard-boiled egg. There are other filler items thrown in, things we think are true of many kids, like you dislike spinach, just to give this profile some credibility. And then Johnny, like other subjects, has to tell us what he wants to eat at an outdoor party, where he has a choice of all different kinds of foods. A long list of foods that he might want to eat at this party. Embedded in that long list, much longer than you see here, the critical items, the eggs and the pickles. So here's what we found. Here's how much people want to eat pickles or eggs at this outdoor party if they haven't been exposed to any feedback, false feedback at all. They slightly prefer the eggs to the pickles, but we don't really care about that result. Here's how much they want to eat the foods if we plied them with our manipulation. We tried to plant the false memory that you got sick, but we didn't succeed. No difference. Here's how much they want to eat the foods if we plied them with a suggestive manipulation and they developed a false belief or memory. They don't want the foods as much. And I will say, you know, this is one of the great moments in the life of an experimental psychologist, where the grad students come in with the Excel spreadsheets and the graphs, and I'm looking and I'm saying, my gosh, we make them not want to eat these foods by planting this false memory. If we could do this with a fattening food, move over Atkins, we could be on the brink of a new dieting technique. And so after we had shown we could do it with pickles and eggs, we decided to try it with a fattening food, and we used strawberry ice cream. An identical type of experiment, get a bunch of data from the subjects. A week later, they come back, really smart computer program, determine certain things happened to you as a child. And Mary, here's your profile. You felt ill after eating strawberry ice cream. We want you to now elaborate upon this. Try to remember it if you can, imagine it if you can't. They have certain elaboration exercises. And later on, Mary's going to tell us what she wants to eat. Here's how much she and others on the average want to eat strawberry ice cream if they hadn't been given any false feedback. Here's how much they want to eat it if they were exposed to the manipulation but didn't fall for it. And here's how much they want to eat strawberry ice cream if they were exposed to the manipulation and fell for it. They don't want to eat it as much. By the way, at this point, we'd shown that you could manipulate people, and within a single experimental session, within an hour, they would be influenced. But we hadn't shown that these false memories would be longer lasting, or that they would be so powerful that they would enable a subject to withstand the temptation of having the actual food in front of you. And now, based on several studies done between 2008 and 2012, we now know with egg salad and also with peach yogurt that these kinds of false memories will affect people over a longish period of time, and they don't eat the foods as much when you put them in front of the subject. And by the way, it's not just food. So recently, in a study headed by Seema Cliff-Asifi, who's here in the audience, working here at UW, we did something similar with alcohol. So you plant a false memory in the mind of someone, for example, that you got sick earlier drinking vodka, and now ask people how much they want to, what kind of a preference they have for vodka. Here's how much they want to have vodka without any false feedback. Here's how much if they were exposed to the manipulation and they didn't fall for it. Here's how much they want the vodka if they were exposed to the manipulation and fell for it. They don't seem to like the idea of vodka as much. Well, it was natural at this point for, if we could plant false memories and you could get people to avoid food, or in the most recent example, avoid a certain kind of alcohol, what if we planted a warm, fuzzy memory, childhood memory? Could we get people to want to eat other foods, like healthy foods, more? And so our group did the same thing with asparagus. We planted a warm, fuzzy memory that you just loved asparagus the first time you tried it. We then asked people what they wanted to eat at Le Restaurant where they'd gone for a special occasion, and we found we could create a positive memory, childhood memory associated with a particular food, and those who fell for our suggestion wanted to eat the food more. And at this point, I have to say, I have my doubts about case histories for complicated reasons, but I wish I could get my hands on one particular individual, and that is our former president, because he is known to have not liked broccoli. In fact, what he actually said in full is, I do not like broccoli. I haven't liked it since I was a little kid, and my mother made me eat it. I am president of the United States. I'm not going to eat any more broccoli. Well, we believe if we could just get our hands on the former president and ply him with our suggestive manipulation, it would just be a matter of time before broccoli was one of his very favorite vegetables. And so about this phenomenon of false memories, there are a lot of questions that I get asked in public audiences, and so I know what you're thinking, and I'll just answer those questions now. Are there any differences between true memories and false memories that you plant in the minds of people? You might, for example, think that the false memories would be less emotional. Maybe people would feel more emotional about their true memories. But with my former graduate student, Cara Laney, we planted false memories in the minds of some people. We found other people who had true memories of those same experiences. And we found that the false memories can be emotional. They can be just as emotional as true memories. And so the degree of expressed emotion is no guarantee of authenticity. Well, how about neuroimaging? What if you could plant some false memories and then have true memories and do some functional magnetic resonance imaging and see if anything was different about the true memories and the false memories? And with my collaborators, Okada and Stark, who know about fMRI, we did exactly that experiment, and we found basically a tiny little bit of difference between the true memories and false memories, but the overwhelming impression in this study is the similarity in neural signatures between true and false memories. Well, maybe you would think that the true memories would persist a little bit longer than false memories would. But with my Chinese collaborators in a misinformation study, we found, if you look, but we came back to people a year and a half after they originally expressed some true experiences versus false ones, and the red bar and blue bar show you that the true and false memories persisted equally over that year and a half period. I get asked the question, who is susceptible? Are there certain kinds of people who are particularly susceptible to these kinds of contaminations of their autobiography? And with these Chinese colleagues in one of the largest misinformation studies ever done in China, we basically do find that there are some individual differences that can predict. So people who score high on standard tests of intelligence are somewhat more resistant to these kinds of manipulations. But I think from these examples, we know that despite those significant correlations with a large number of subjects, even some really, really smart, accomplished people are going to be susceptible to these kinds of manipulations. And so in closing, I just want to say that some of the implications of this work, we are learning about the malleable nature of memory. It has implications for many domains in life. We're close to what you might want to say is developing a recipe for how you might go about planting a false memory in the minds of people, or how it might get done out there in the real world. There are practical implications. I never thought I'd be getting into the business of nutritional selection, maybe making a dent in the obesity problem in our society, but I think that's an implication from the recent work. And of course, there are implications for legal cases. And I do have to say that with this mind technology, there are going to be a lot of ethical issues that are going to come up. If we can control the mind and if we can control behavior, we're going to have to think about when should we use this technology and should we ever ban its use. If I've learned anything from now many decades of working on memory distortion and false memories, I think it's captured here. It relates to something that Jeff said too, that just because a memory is expressed with confidence, with detail, and with emotion, it doesn't mean that it's true. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
That was, hello? That was wonderful. We might have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions, and that's about it. But let's start over there since she's first up, and then we'll come back over here.
Loftus. I went to graduate school here and left right when you were, and started right when you were leaving. So now I feel satisfied in my education at UW to finally have heard you lecture. So my question is, you're talking about how memory and perception and then behavior can all be falsely influenced. And I'm thinking a lot about how that goes on in everyday life in all sorts of ways. How do we guard against that? So for example, as females, and we see our first 5 set of questions all asked by males, and as females, it was very easy to sort of step into the background and not, I guess I'm wondering if you have thoughts about how to guard against these problems that are outside of, say, cognitive behavior therapy techniques and that sort of thing, that help women progress as researchers and standing up and asking questions and that sort of thing. A little bit off topic, but I thought you'd be the person to ask.
Well, so part of your question is how do we guard against these kinds of influence? I mean, I think knowledge is kind of power, so I think it's important to sort of be aware of the extent of the malleability of memory. There is some work that shows if you warn people, they can be resistant, but they've got to keep those warnings fresh in mind. I'm not sure we want to be walking through life always being vigilant of what people are saying. There are some other ways, though, that I think that this work is kind of useful, and that is, I think we can be more tolerant of other people when they make mistakes. You don't have to, like, immediately Pinocchio. Like the pundits try to do with Hillary Clinton. I mean, just because somebody says something wrong, it doesn't mean they're lying, which is often the first conclusion that some people will come to.
Thank you. Is this a short question? Or?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll have 1 short question, and then after that, we'll open it up, and folks can come down here to talk to her individually.
Okay, so you mentioned a couple of different techniques that you have used in your research and other people have to implant false memories, and I was wondering if you found that any work better than others?
Well, when Jackie Pickrell and I were publishing the Lost in the Mall study, and then the follow-up studies that others did with the vicious animal attack and the indoor accident and so on, those were very tedious. There was a strong form of suggestion, but it involved us recruiting the family members of our subjects, getting information from those family members, planting those ideas into the minds of the subjects. It was very tedious and very time-consuming, but very effective. And so ultimately, we've been looking for some ways to be a little bit more efficient about things, and did develop that false feedback technique. It's hard to compare the apples to the oranges. The original technique may be more powerful, although the type of memory we planted is also very different. So I can't be sure of that. But we went to these other techniques in part because they're more efficient, and we could plant false memories in the minds of lots of people at once instead of one at a time.
Thank you very much. And thank you,
Okay.
Beth Loftus and Jeff Loftus.
Thank you all.